You call yourself a libertarian populist.
Yes.
And every time that I've given a conference in Latin America about what is populism, right, they always ask this question. My answer is, for me, populism is a manipulation tool, a psychological manipulation tool that can be used by anyone in the political spectrum, and basically is telling people things that either don't go with any economic logic or with any history lesson, right? It's like insisting on things that simply are not true. Like, we're gonna give you free stuff. You are incapable of being responsible for yourself, and this authoritarian. But I get that when you call yourself a libertarian populist, you want to create this controversy, right?
Yes. Well, it goes to the various meanings that the same word can have. And I could use the word populism, but I could also use the word democracy. I'm a radical Democrat because I think when push comes to shove, if you think about the market process that we love so much, it is a wild open democracy where people are choosing and voting with their feet and deciding what they want, what they don't want. And that outcome is democratic. For better or worse, in my mind, worse, more people like Taylor Swift than the very weird music that I like. But the market has decided. The beauty is I'm not mandated by government to go to a Taylor Swift concert, which would be my version of hell on earth.
Okay.
You probably love Taylor Swift, but
no, I admire her for her balls more than her music, but yeah.
yeah, and I think that's a fair way to think about it. I mean,
Yeah.
she's a tremendous entrepreneur.
Yeah.
But if you're talking about democracy or populism in the vulgar sense that a simple majority of the people that show up to vote get to do whatever they want to the rest of us, that is the opposite of what I'm talking about. And I think we need to understand that politics is a corruption of something that could otherwise be a beautiful thing. Because when I use the word populism, and I looked this up, I gave a talk at the Mont Pelerin Society, again trying to be provocative in defense of libertarian populism, but I actually looked up the word populism, and in the dictionary I found, it just means to be popular. It doesn't have all the connotations that you see in Latin America.
Yeah.
And certainly populists in the political space have quite often manipulated our emotions, and there's always an enemy, there's a common enemy that you have to rally the people against.
Yeah.
But I would consider Ron Paul a populist, maybe an accidental populist, because his populism was based on a deeply felt philosophy, primarily based on Austrian economics, that he had been that guy his entire career, and that authenticity and his willingness to just speak his mind about the things that he believed in, on things like the Federal Reserve. There are now serious people in Washington, D.C. talking about ending the Fed.
Yeah.
When those chants arose spontaneously at Ron Paul rallies 15 years ago, nobody seriously thought that we're going to end the Federal Reserve, or that it was a conversation we were even allowed to have in serious company. But that happens now, and that's very much a populist sentiment being pushed from the bottom up. There's not a single person amongst political elites in Washington that want to end the Fed, because they feed off the system that inflates the currency and steals from the have-nots and gives to the haves. So I think when I say populism, I want libertarians to think about what it would mean to really make our ideas and values popular with grassroots activists, people that vote.
So if to become popular, libertarians have to choose from their ideas and values which ones are going to be the priority. What I hear in Latin America is you got to come to the right wing and the conservatives because they are more popular than your ideas. So in order to fight the Chavez and the Evo Morales and the Lula da Silvas and the López Obrador of the region, you have to sacrifice the civil liberties that the principles of libertarianism so much defend. Like, let's say, open borders, decriminalize abortion, gay marriage, all that stuff, like leave it out, because on the economic side, you are going to become more popular if you support people like Bolsonaro, Mauricio Macri, Bukele, Piñera in Chile. But what I see in the long run is that this right wing, whenever the libertarians or classical liberals of the region ally themselves to them to become more popular, and they do become popular because they win elections on those platforms, is that in the long run it doesn't work. And then the Lulas come back, and then Maduro is always in Venezuela, and Cuba never stands a chance of being free. So it's like, I don't know if by becoming popular, we're going to become effective in the case of Latin America. And the other problem that I see is that, as I was telling you, most of the content of libertarianism, its ideas, its values, its principles, is in English. So what's happening with social media is that people become libertarians with a tweet, and then they don't know what libertarianism is. And what they really are is super conservative right-wing Republicans in the context of the United States, but they're using the label. So the label has become popular, not necessarily the ideas and the values of true libertarianism, right? And it's all in the sake of reducing some taxes and making some economic progress that lasts for a little bit, but we already know with the example of Pinochet, that if you don't do something more cultural, that is even more popular with libertarian ideas, then even those advances in economic freedom are gonna be destroyed in the long run. No?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I think we need to appreciate that our job is fundamentally to change hearts and minds and culture and shift power for all those decisions, even controversial social policies that are very divisive to people, everything from abortion to immigration to sexual freedom. These are all things that are better left out of government entirely, in my mind. I don't want the government deciding those things. I want people deciding those things. Right. And culture is a fundamental part of that. So I think our philosophy is not taking sides in culture wars so much as teaching people that the only way that we can live and let live is to shift that power back to people and families and communities. So it's a cultural battle, not a political battle per se. Politics is downstream of culture.
Yeah.
And I think that's one thing that I think about. That's why we did Free the People instead of another super PAC. We had done politics, we had done grassroots organizing, but we wanted people to realize that responsibility for those choices. But the broader thing, and I was a Tea Party organizer, which was in the context of American politics considered a right-wing thing, and it actually rose out of the Ron Paul movement, which he was running as a Republican, even though Ron Paul isn't really a Republican, he's a libertarian. Yeah. But we have a two-party system, and that's different in Latin America where you have multiple parties. Yeah. But you still basically have a left and a right.
Yeah.
I think that's a challenge, and I was talking about all these people from the left who have become anti-authoritarian. Many of them have joined the Trump coalition because where else would they go in their minds? Well, I don't like those guys, so I guess I'm over here with those guys. But there's various factions in the Trump coalition that I think are fascinating and fundamentally different than what we saw in 2016. In 2016, I ran a Rand Paul for President super PAC. And then when Rand pulled out of the race, I ran a Gary Johnson Libertarian super PAC. But this time you have like the Elon Vivek Ramaswamy wing, the Doge wing. And for what it's worth, they have quite often described themselves as libertarian curious. Like they wouldn't say I'm a libertarian, but they're like, I'm really interested in these ideas. You had the Make America Healthy wing.
Yeah.
And not just Robert F. Kennedy Jr., but my friends that were the COVID dissidents, like Jay Bhattacharya. Even comedians like my old nemesis, John Mayer, Bill Maher. John Mayer is a guitarist. Bill Maher is actually starting to sound quite reasonable on questions about free speech. So the question is, can we libertarians actually create a space that is based on values and ideas, that is meaningful, where people are they're always gonna come in cherry picking, right? Mm-hmm. I like free speech. Mm-hmm. How dare the government prevent me from speaking out against mandatory masks? Mm-hmm. But that's an opportunity to then extend that philosophy to other things. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a cultural battle, but I also think when push comes to shove, in the United States, in the context of Donald Trump's next administration, there are guys like Jay Bhattacharya who is going to take over the National Institutes of Health. I want to work with him to make sure that we never ever do what we did to people again through the NIH. And that's cherry picking. I'm not going to like everything that Trump does. Mm-hmm. But now that the election is over, I'm going to try to find ways to push as much of that in the direction of liberty as I can. Same with Doge. They're talking about ending the Fed. They're talking about ending the Department of Education. They're talking about some sweeping reforms that are at least now in part of the public conversation. Not all of that is going to happen. Yeah. I'm not naive enough to think it will. Mm-hmm. But if I can get that into the popular conversation, if I can make them popular, that would be pretty cool.